This is Dr. K in Omaha, Nebraska, with the next installment, volume number 11 of the Turf Racing series, covering the Go for Gold book, which is available for sale. Today's topic is an interesting one because I think it's one that everyone talks about, everyone thinks about, but nobody really knows how to do it. So let's figure out the real question about how do you figure out if a horse is getting better, if it's getting worse, or if it is getting better, how much do you expect it to get better in its next race? The people who are good at this get paid for it. And so let's talk about it in a couple different contexts. The first thing is when we're talking about a horse that's getting worse, you can usually see it both in terms, in a numerical sense of you see the speed ratings are getting worse, but more than anything else, I think what you see is a change in the class level. Maybe they were running in a Group 1 or a Group 2 in Europe or a Grade 1, Grade 2 in the United States, and all of a sudden they're dropping back to overnight stakes or to Group 3, Grade 3s or something like that. And a lot of times when you see them dropping and they're not getting any better, you know you've got a horse that's just getting worse, and the trainer doesn't know what to do with it. You know, if it's a horse maybe that can get to a claiming level, you'll oftentimes see trainers basically just drop it to the bottom, try and get a win, and I call it the fire sale, and those horses ought to be avoided. There's a couple trainers that do it a lot and win a lot, but we're not going to talk about them here today. But projecting harder or better is so much harder because it's sort of the reverse of what we just talked about with worse. You're really looking for that horse that's moved up a level, moved up 2 levels, and continued to do well. It doesn't mean that necessarily won when it moved up, but it was still competitive in the races, even if it got beat by 2 or 3 lengths and ran 3rd or 4th. But when you can see a horse continue to move up levels, whether it's within the allowance ranks, whether it's in the graded stakes ranks, and continue to be competitive, then you know you've got an improving horse. And the numbers generated ought to correlate with that too. A lot of times you can go and run the numbers from an earlier race, which were pretty good, but now when they're at a higher level and still competitive, then their numbers are going to be much, much better too. So that's a good way to tell whether the math is right and whether they really are getting better. But let's talk about sort of a couple of ways that you can do it using the Daily Racing Forms Formulator. One of the things that I love to do, and I talked about it in the earlier versions of the Turf Racing series here on video, is when you pull up a race on Formulator, so you've got a horse in, you think you want to look at this particular race, you click on it on the date, and then you'll see the thing that lists, it's got the whole chart there, but then it says next race. Click on the next race. And to me, that's the greatest function in Formulator because you can tell instantly, and this is true whether you're going back 3 or 4 races or the very last race, you've got a really good idea of how those horses that were the competitors have done since then. Sometimes they've moved up, sometimes they moved down, but it gives you an idea of what the company they were keeping. And a lot of times what I like to do with a horse, let's say I'm looking at a race that's 3 or 4 back, maybe there's a really good horse in the race, maybe I'll click on that horse and see how that horse has progressed, or maybe it's regressed and gotten worse too. But the next race function, I think, is absolutely the most valuable feature of the Formulator program, because once you pull the first chart up for the race you're looking at and press next race, you've got an instant idea of how good that horse was in its next race. Now maybe they've changed surfaces, maybe they've gone from sprint to route to sprint. You've got to factor that stuff out, but it gives you an idea of kind of where the opponents were at and what they're doing now. One of the real big debates within the context of getting better, getting worse, is what I call numbers versus class. And one of the things that I think is a little bit different between turf racing and dirt racing is when I have a set of really good numbers in a dirt race, I assume that horses can move up and run those numbers. Now, a $2,500 claimer that's running, allowance numbers isn't going to run up into an allowance race. But when you've got allowance horses that are now moving up into overnight stakes, grade 3s maybe to start with, if their numbers are competitive and meet the par for that level on dirt, I'm going to assume they can get there. On turf, I take a real different view, because even if they've got the numbers, they've still got to have the class first. And if they don't have the class first, and we talked about it in the earlier version on class, that next race function is so good at helping you determine how much class your horse has because of what its opponents have done. And so once you get in the situation of saying, well, this horse has really good numbers, but you've still got to make sure the class is there too on turf. You got to have it, and you're not going to win without it. So now let's look at a couple good examples of a horse that's getting better and a horse that's getting worse. Here's a good example of a horse that's getting worse, though it doesn't necessarily look like it to some people in some ways. But what I mean by worse, particularly in turf racing, where you're talking about a lot of graded stakes races and a lot of overnight stakes races, you've got a horse here that in 2022 was running in graded races, grade 3 races, ran 3 grade 3 races in 2023, all of a sudden drops down to a overnight stakes race, can't win it, stays at the overnight stakes race level, can't win it. So if you were doing a class run only on this thing, what you'd say is, if this horse moves back to a grade 3, grade 2, grade 1, this horse doesn't have the class. And to me, when you've got a horse that was running fairly successfully at the grade 3 level, 3 times, and all of a sudden it goes to the overnight and it can't win, even though it was close, but it still didn't win. It should have been able to win on class alone, except for the fact that horse just isn't getting better. It's getting worse. By contrast, the next slide shows what I think is the prototypical horse that's getting better. You've got a horse that when it was racing on dirt in 2021, 22, early 23, was racing fairly well, got to the allowance level, ran okay in a grade 2 on dirt, but now all of a sudden it goes to turf for the first time. And what happens the first time it runs on turf? It runs an allowance race, wins easy. Second turf race, stays in basically allowance company, it's an optional claimer, again, wins easy. Now all of a sudden it moves up to a grade 3 and he wins. And to me, it's the most easy way to see a horse getting better. When you look at all the dirt races, you saw it sort of got better, got worse within its dirt cycles, but all of a sudden it gets on turf and it's become a monster. And that's what you're looking for, that it continues to get a little bit better and continues to win. Or again, even if the horse had run second or something in the grade 3, I still would have said the horse is getting better. This is the type of horse you say to yourself, we don't know how good this horse is. All we know is that it worked its way up through the ranks and won a grade 3. Is this horse good enough to win a grade 2 or grade 1? Don't know, but I will not exclude this horse on class, and I will use the numbers to figure out in its next race. If it runs at a grade 3 and the pace scenario works out for them, type of horse I'd love to bet, because until they get beat, you got to assume they're not going to get beat. But we don't know how good this horse is. We just know that this horse was not too bad on dirt, but all of a sudden it gets on turf and it just keeps getting better. This is one of the best examples of improvement you'll ever see. So in the final analysis, when you're trying to figure out how to think about a horse in the race today, and you've paced the race out, you've got the class in there, and you're thinking about the class, you've got to think about, well, okay, maybe it hasn't run against a grade 1 or a grade 2, but do we have reasons to think it could get better and qualify at the grade 1, grade 2 level? We absolutely do, because we have a horse that's 3 for 3, just continues to get better and better and better. Doesn't mean it's going to win the thing. You don't know who else is in the race or anything at this point. You don't know if the pace scenario is going to be favorable. But at least on class, I know I've got an improving horse that ought to have a chance at the grade 1 and grade 2 level. And again, this is just a great example of improvement and what you need to be looking for, so that you don't exclude a horse that might otherwise sort of look like he doesn't qualify in class, when the real answer to the question is we don't know whether he's a grade 1, grade 2. We got to run the race. But these type of horses move up to the grade 1, grade 2 all the time, and they win usually at good odds because so many people will discount a grade 3 when they get to the grade 1 level, and so the money will go another way. And again, until this horse loses, I would back him. So that's all we have today on improvement versus non-improvement. I think it's the hardest skill to have as a handicapper because projecting improvement is not easy. And so the better you can get at it, the more you can think about it as an issue so that you can apply it in every race, the better off you're going to be. And that's all we have for today.